Have you had your hot cup of tea? If you haven't, it's time for Eden Tea, the finest garden tea. Eden Tea cares for you and I, and reminding us, even as we are seeing the numbers where COVID-19 is concerned rising in certain counties, restrictions being put in place. That's a reminder for you and I to ensure that we keep doing the seemingly small things that have a huge impact. What are these seemingly small things? I'm talking about washing your hands with soap and running water. I'm talking about putting on your face mask. And I'm talking about maintaining interpersonal distance. It's amazing how, when one side of the country there's an upsurge in the numbers, the other sides we forget. You're thinking, sasa ni watu wa Nyanza na Kisumu huko na Western, watu wa Nairobi, we forget to put on our face masks, we forget social distancing, matatus are packing people in there. We are not yet out of the woods yet. And so Eden Tea is reminding you and I, let's be our brother's keeper. Let's keep vigilant. Let's keep to the COVID-19 protocols. Also reminding you, Eden Tea is available at the supermarkets. Different flavors: Eden Green Tea, Eden Purple Tea, Eden Lemon, and Eden Ginger, and Eden Premium Tea. 5 wonderful flavors for you to choose from. Comes to you in affordable prices, wonderful packaging, great taste. Try it out today. Eden Tea, finest garden tea. Let's take a look at the local dailies. What are some key stories that are making headlines today? Daily Nation, big story. MPs block tax on bread and boda. Hallelujah. For those of us who are bread lovers, that's some good news. Between a rock and a hard place, Treasury CS Ukur Yatani had proposed the new taxes to boost Kenya's revenue collection, but National Assembly Committee has shot down the measures, arguing that these are basic items which should be zero rated. Yes, wacha watu wakule mkate, my friend. Siweke tax kwa mkate. Also, Uhuru's big fight back in Ruto turf. After his visit to Kambani later this month, the president will head to his politically estranged deputies' Rift Valley backyard of Uasin Gishu, Trans Nzoia, and Nakuru counties as he continues his inspection of government projects across the country. This is the picture here. And I'm just thinking, man, so many people want to be president, but I kind of think, looking at different pictures of presidents before they came into office and after they left office, hii kazi ni mzito. Inazeeshaga mtu. It's just, I wonder why people run for the position. Anyway, big boost for trade, tourism, as Safari Rally comes to Naivasha. Safaricom has signed sponsorship deal with Equator African Rally champion winner Carl Flash Tundo. Take a look at that story as well. There's a picture here of VOK dump site in Mombasa. Residents are angered because the VOK dump site, my friend, imejaa takataka tena, and it's quite a concern. They're calling on the county government to do something about that. Okay, there's quite a bit on politics. You can update yourself on that. On page 6, Gideon's loyalty to One Kenya in doubt as he skips key meetings. Find out what that means. Alafu kuna siasa. I'm trying to see, is there anything about COVID-19? Vaccine anxiety hits the Lake region. Governors want to procure rapid testing kits and import vaccines directly. Says Kakamega donated doses to a neighboring county as residents feared being vaccinated. Take a look at that story. That's Matters COVID-19. And then looking at the center pages, you have quite a bit on opinion on different things. Pull out today is motoring, best value for money. A reader with 2 million bob to spend on a car asks Baraza to help her choose from 3 she is eyeing. Find out what those 3 are and what Baraza has to say about that. Second pullout is on parenting. Mom, where are you? That's the question. Fanta Jalo is traveling from the Gambia to Kenya to search for a mother she has never seen. How could that be? You need to read her story in the parenting pullout. And then Pastor Philip Kitoto is answering a question here. Please introduce me to the lonely, successful woman in your column. Oh, there was a woman who wrote, and she was lonely but very successful. Somebody wants to be hooked up, my friend. Hook up a brother. Okay, other stories making headlines. Sports mixed results for men on day one. We are talking about beach volleyball. Olympic trials team faces Mali, who lost to Mozambique. You can take a look at that. And then also, UEFA Euro 2020 mountain to climb. Germany square it out with Hungary without injured Müller today. Also, Portuguese versus France, key game with huge implications. And then, my friend, one more day. It's one day to go. WRC Safari Rally. Shakedown launches real action today. Remember how when we were kids, we would get fascinated by rally cars. I mean, seeing it up close, seeing it live, we felt like we had gone to heaven and come back and gone back to heaven to stay. It was just ecstatic. So take a look at that story as well. And then in the back pages, Chaos Mass Civil Servants Union polls, incumbents claim victory as other candidates vow court action. One group claims rivals were using state connections to influence the results. Those are some of the key stories you will find in the local dailies today. Grab yourself a copy, keep yourself informed on what's happening both locally and also internationally. In the next short while, we get into the financial clinic for today. This month, we are focusing on those who are employed, and today we'll be looking at labor laws and some of the things you need to know as somebody who's employed, your rights, and some of the rights of the employer. Hiyo maneno yote tutachambua as coming up shortly. So keep listening to Family Radio 316 and keep watching Family TV. Leo ni Wednesday, siku ya clinic ya mfuko. Kama kawaida bench nimeweka hapo nje na nimeisanitize na nimewekea sticker. Mkae vizuri, kila mtu na maswali yake mkononi, because the doctors today, the financial doctors are in the house. As we look at the legal aspect of employment, and joining me in studio today via Zoom, I've got Wycliffe Osoro, who's a HR professional. Wycliffe, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you. It's happy to be with you this morning.
Karibu sana, it's good to have you. Your painting, Naitaka, the one behind you. Karibu, good to have you. We also have Vincent Tumbaka. Vincent Tumbaka is a lawyer and a policy consultant. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
Awesome. Where una painting? You're not artistic.
Me missing a painting.
You're not artistic like this guy.
I've learned my wall. Me, I'm very plain.
What you see is what you get.
This is what you get. I stick to the point.
I like that. So today we are looking at the legal aspect of employment, and I thought let's begin at the beginning when somebody is happy they've gotten a job. And sometimes you hear ngojea contract and you start working without the contract. So at the point of employment, what are some legal things that both the employer and the employee need to know that are very important? Vincent.
I think I'll go first, but I feel like this discussion about employment law normally concentrates a lot on the employee. Now, I happen to be one of those individuals who have been in the entrepreneurship, self-employment space for quite a while because of the kind of orientation. So I'll begin from the point of view of an employer. And I would say for an employer, I wrote down some 4 things I think employers need to know. I mean, for the time of becoming an entrepreneur. The same way you're saying, people are normally excited when they're given a job.
Yeah.
Many people romanticize the idea of being self-employed, the idea of being an employer. I think about, the way you're going to be having a lot of time, the way you're going to be making your own money and in charge of your own money. They think about Jeff Bezos and Jack Ma. But I want to say a few things as a person who has had interesting encounters, including going to a labor office. Whether when you go to a labor office, that's when you know you're a real employer, when you're someone to the labor office. And I would say number one, that employers need to be generous. Generous because you will give out money that you will not get your value back. You will hire someone, and then 3 weeks down the line, you realize this is the wrong guy. And the law requires you to give him notice. And so you see, if you're choosing to work with him for the next 1 month,
yes,
and he's messing you up, it is easier for you to just give him payment in lieu of notice. So you just tell him, I know I'm supposed to give you 30 days in advance. It is June, but I'm going to give you your salary for July. Let's do an. Number two, you need to be very uncompromising in your standards. Why am I saying that? As an employer, you need to know that employment law is not really for employers, it is for employees. Because the whole philosophy of employment law is that employers are powerful people, which is not, may or may not be the case. And like I always ask this question, when you see those beggars who are being, somebody is pushing somebody on a wheelchair on the streets, who is the employer? Is it the beggar employing the guy pushing him, or the guy pushing him employing the beggar? I don't know in that, are they partners? Very interesting. So number 3, very important for employers, focus on building partnerships with your employees. Make sure that you're generous. Number 2, your standards are very high, they're uncompromising. So you notice somebody is not delivering in the first 2 or 3 weeks, please release them. Because the longer you stay with them, the higher the chances of your relationship being acrimonious. And those funny employees are the ones who will take you to court when you fire them. And you'll be feeling like, my goodness, the amount of grace I gave these guys, but the law will not give any grace in return. So building partnership becomes important because you need to see your employees as part of your family.
I like that.
Those people cannot become part of your family. That's where my Christian ethics now starts coming in. Then don't work with them. Don't urumia someone at work. No, don't do that, because the day it becomes acrimonious and you go to court or you go to labor court or you go to the labor officer, it will be acrimonious and the demands of the law on your side will be very, very big. And then finally be prepared to make mistakes. I think that is something you need to prepare yourself to do. Start learning how to fire people. Start learning how to give people bad news if you're going to become an employer. If you don't have it within you, please just go and get a job. Forget about being self-employed. And some of the issues to look at very quickly.
Before we go into some of the issues to look at, my friend, and some of us have been thinking maybe we should be employers. Wycliffe, I could see you smiling all through when Vincent was saying, what are some thoughts you were having when you were smiling? And also, I want you to also flip it and talk to us about the person who's being employed. What do they need to know?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. Definitely a few interesting thoughts that have been shared there by Vincent. I think on my side, I'll look at it from the question that you asked first, in terms of the employment contract. Is it necessary? Definitely, it is necessary to have a written employment contract. The law also provides that there could be oral contracts. But then beyond a specific duration, then you need to have a written contract. That is what then puts the relationship between the employer and the employee. So for a start, like you asked in the beginning, is it necessary to have a contract? Yes, it is. And it's important for anyone who's getting into employment to have a contract of service, which stipulates what the employee is entitled to. So in that excitement of getting a job, I think it's almost very important to ensure that you have that paper. Well, in as much as it's important to have that paper, the law also assumes where that paper is not provided, there are specific particulars that need to be present in that relationship. And they're guided by the Employment Act, specifically in Kenya, the Employment Act of 2007. There's also other labor legislation that guides what needs to happen. So from the employee side, I think the first thing is do not start the job before you have the contract, because sometimes you may assume certain things, and then you will find the provisions that are given in the contract are contrary to what you assume. So before anyone starts a job, it's the first most important thing to then have the contract. And the contract has quite a number of things. I think in the discussion we'll be able to look at what really needs to be in the contract and what doesn't require to be in the contract.
Okay. Sometimes I hear. Sometimes I see.
Summary.
Vincent, Wycliffe, before you continue, sorry for cutting you short, but still on the whole contract issue, sometimes I find situations where somebody is told that, okay, we'll give you a contract, but first we want you on probation. Miezi kama mbili tatu tuone kama unaweza hii kazi, and so there's nothing written, you know, so there are no guarantees. So you do those 3 months and then you're told, haukutosha mboga, you just move on.
Okay. So technically, by law, the Employment Act does provide for probationary contracts.
Yes.
And probationary contracts mean they give you that opportunity to test that employee during that period. But one caution that I put to employers, and usually even employees during this probationary period, is that it needs to be very clear what are the things that you need to achieve during that probationary period.
Okay.
So a lot of employers are guilty of not defining the things that the employee should do during that period. And once those things are defined, then there needs to be monitoring of what needs to happen. So by law, a probationary contract cannot be more than 12 months. Ideally, it should be maybe 6 months with an extension of 6 months. But even when you're extending that probationary employment, you need to have the concurrence or the agreement of the employee. So you'll have that discussion with the employee at the point at which you're having the extension and clearly outline the reasons where, like you sort of said, Haitoshi Mboga, where it's, the person is not living up to what you require, and then you can be able to extend that. So fortunately, the law does give that provision. But like I said, even where there's the probationary contract, it's important that that is also documented. That's when it actually then does come into force.
Okay.
But it's important. But you remember there's also the oral bit.
Yes.
So you can also be held to that. And the fact that you've been going to the workplace, and I think and Vincent can confirm, if you go to court, you'll be able to prove that I have been coming to this workplace and there's been deliverables. So someone can't, and I think in the law, if there's no written contract, the onus is on the employer to, prove or disprove that there was that relationship.
Okay.
So not for the employee to prove that.
Sasa. Vincent, I'm just wondering, what about casual laborers? Kuna wale watu wanafanyaga kazi ya mkono. You know, you're here for a week, you go for 2 months, and then you're told go home, and then you come back again, you do another 2 months. What does the law say about casual laborers?
Of course, there are, if you're looking at the law, and we has rightly put it that if a job requires, I think if I'm not wrong, it's consecutively coming to a period of 30 days or 3 months, you are forced to come up into an employment contract.
Okay.
When you're a casual laborer, then it means your service are short-lived and short-timed, and therefore, as a casual laborer, at the very most, apart from occupational health and safety, and you won't have rights, like for instance, you can't attend leave days, because if you look at the whole idea, first of all, is that employment is a contract of service. And if you look at employment, even employment law, employment benefits are tied to time. There are some employment benefits and conditions that are not tied to time. For instance, the right against sexual harassment, that one is not tied to any time limit. But for instance, you cannot have leave days unless you work somewhere for 12 months. You cannot be entitled to sick leave before 2 months. Probation is within 6 months, an additional 12 months, additional 6 months to make it 12. So being a contract of service, time is a very essential consideration. In fact, if you look at the whole Employment Act, you realize time consideration comes up over and over again. When you declare someone's redundancy, you are supposed to pay a severance fee of equivalent to 15 days for every month that they were able to work. Now, that means if you are a casual, you are basically not an employee. You are what we call an independent contractor. Because then it means even statutory deductions, of course, you'd be liable for, the employer will be liable to pay your NSSF, but that's as far as it goes. In terms of your taxation, you're on your own. So I think, of course, the other thing I want to bring out is that there are some genius HR practitioners and lawyers who have come up with situations where you are an employee and a casual at the same time. So you are officially a casual, but if we look at what you are doing normatively, you're actually an employee. And they take this particular approach because they're trying to avoid things like unionization. They don't want people to join a trade union, and therefore it has an impact on them. Or maybe they just don't want the responsibility of handling the many issues that come with you being an employee. That you see, you hear these scenarios and arrangements where somebody works somewhere for 2 months and then he's forced to go for a 2-week break. Or he's supposed to create an imaginary 2-week break somewhere in between. Or even some places where I've heard where somebody works for 6 months and then you go home for 6 months and then you come back again. And all these are systems and schemes by employers to try and make you look like a casual or look like an independent contractor and somebody over whom they have no responsibility.
Okay.
But before we move, I'd like to point out something about the law. The law does two things in employment. The law can either be a guide or a referee.
Guide, okay.
For good employers, the law is a guide. I keep on pointing out to many people that entrepreneurs have a very high potential for injustice. Remember, even for colonialism, the Imperial British Corporation was a company. It was not, first of all, a government. So employers have a very high propensity for injustice. The law guides you not to be unjust. The law guides you.
Yeah.
But it becomes a referee when there's a problem. And that's my challenge with employment law. By the time it's a referee, it means you people are in trouble. Umekosana. Kama mjakosana, it should be a guide.
Wow. Talking about contracts, are there different kinds of contracts? Because unasikia huyu ni permanent, huyu yuko na contract ya miaka mbili. You know, what are the different types of contract? And if your contract has a time frame within it, what happens when that time frame lapses but you're still working? Your employer keeps telling you, endelea tu tutakupatia contract ingine, but you're still working. What are the implications of that?
Okay, I think I'll allow Wycliffe to opportunity.
Yes.
But before he moves on that,
Yeah.
I would just say, I think, as I said, remember time.
Yeah.
Time is the most critical thing in any employment law, in regards to employment law. So I would say, one, as Wycliffe has mentioned earlier, even in the absence of contract, employment law is there to make sure that there are some bare minimums that an employer cannot avoid simply by the virtue of there not being a contract. But also let me point out something. For employers, it is risky not to have a contract because according to employment law, when you go to a court of law, it is up to the employer to prove any allegation, anything that you want to say. So the employee is always right. The employer will have to kujitetea.
Okay. Wycliffe,
Yes.
anything you want to add
Thank
to
you.
that?
Yes, thank you, Vincent. In terms of the types of contracts that have been outlined, yes, you've talked about permanent, but ideally and technically by the law, there's no such thing as a permanent contract because all contracts are time bound, as Vincent has said. So what we technically refer to as permanent and pensionable tends to mean that this person is employed until the retirement age of that organization.
Okay.
But in the past, in the previous law, then there was talk of what was permanent. But then when you come to fixed contracts, or which stipulates the time within which the contract will be held, they have a definite start and end date. And what you can do is within the contract, there needs to be a provision of whether it can be extended or not. So if there is a provision of when it can be extended, usually you'll have that put in the contract and say 1 month before the expiry of the contract, you will be told whether you'll be given notice on whether the contract will be extended or not. Where that is not, where that is silent, technically your contract ends on the date that the contract ends. Yes, it can be implied if you continue to work. So for employers, you should at least ensure that once that period is over, the employee is not coming to work. And as an employee, you should be very wary of going to work where you don't have a contract with the employer. Of course, the casual employees, we've talked about it before, there is technically usually no contract there because they're employed for a day at a time. That is basically what is in the contract. And the different types of contract also do determine what type of notice. I know Vincent had alluded to that earlier on.
Yeah.
And the Act does talk about casuals not requiring notice for people who are employed for a week by the end of the next week, and for people who are employed and paid monthly, then they need to give at least 28 days notice to the time that they will give. So that's a guide. But what Vincent did talk about is the Act is really a guide. And good employers would go over and above that. And then the Act will also protect employees from those employers who would want to violate the employment conditions.
Okay. Shortly, we'll talk about money. people are interested in money, does the law say anything about remuneration, and what are some of the things that it says, if it does say anything? If you have any questions for us today, 20316 is the SMS line. WhatsApp number 0786 316 316. Financial Clinic, legal aspects of employment. We are hanging out with HR professional Wycliffe Osoro and also lawyer and policy consultant Vincent Ombaka. If you have any questions for us today, 20316 is the SMS line. WhatsApp number 0786 316 316. Gentlemen, before we get into the money aspect, I'm just wondering, because many of us are employers, but we don't recognize we are employers because we have the house girl or the house manager in the house. Are you saying she also needs to have a contract?
Oh yes, actually, that's one of the interesting categories. I even wrote it down.
Yeah.
Because she's giving you service for over 30 days, 30 working days, over 3 months.
Yeah.
And then there's even more questions about house helps in this country. One, are they entitled to leave?
Yes.
One. Secondly, overtime, because what are their working hours? The law normally requires 8 hours. In fact, if you look at the Employment Act, we have various regulations which define that individuals which define the various working standards for various people in different industries.
Okay.
So what applies to them? And of course, the very tricky issue for them, the issue of payment. And beyond that, I know some people will be very quick to say, but they are eating my food.
Yeah, and I am housing them.
My food and housing. But Employment Act actually expects employers to be able to make provisions for your employees' housing. And secondly, where the nature of the work requires, and the house help is one of them, you need to be able to make provision for food. So actually, according to the employment law, food and housing is not like you've given them the world. No. That is a bare minimum. Giving food and housing is a bare minimum expected by the law.
What? Wycliffe, anything to add to that?
No. I think, like he's rightfully put it, even in domestic work regulations, interestingly, even I believe it's the ILO and the standards that are there do talk about basic working conditions for that group of workers. So it's difficult, I know, for more people to enforce that, but should there be any challenge, you will be in trouble should you be taken to the Employment and Labor Relations Court or to a labor officer on having violated a number of those items, especially even things around leave. And sometimes they say it's also good for you to document when you pay, get them to sign off, because someone can say whatever you are paying was donations and not quite a salary. So I think it's important that care is taken where you can draw up a contract. Simple, the Employment Act does guide you. But I know most Kenyans are skeptical about doing that because once you become an employer, there's certain obligations that you need to do as an employer. You need to file your returns in terms of income tax, when deduct the payee at source. So there's quite a bit of technicalities that make it a little bit difficult to enforce. But I think, in a nutshell, it needs to be treated as any other type of employment.
Okay.
Let me come in a bit on that.
Yeah.
I think also just to point out that right now, as you speak, there are a number of very industrious young lawyers who have realized the cash cow in houses.
Oh.
And so they would come and say, Wycliffe, they find your house up and they inquire how much are you being paid and are you being given overtime. And so they very easily find a way of quickly inciting your house help against the employer. Of course, rightfully so, because there are a number of gray areas. We're living in a country where 83% of Kenyans are in the informal economy. So surely, employment law is formal. It is not operating in the informal sector. And so they're able to promise a heaven on earth to these people and very quickly do a mathematics and tell them how they're going to get 1 million. Of course, whether the court can grant that 1 million, yes. Whether or not that 1 million is going to end up in the hands of the household, unfortunately, that is another story altogether.
Yes.
That is not to say that we should become unjust. But also, as Wycliffe has said, and very important, one of the things I think is a problem in this country is the fact that when your employer pays for you, your household, that is considered a benefit. I
Mhm.
find that counterproductive in Kenya in the sense that today, if you were to allow employers, if you were to allow house help to be an untaxable benefit, what would happen is, for example, Safaricom would hire house help for a number of its staff. So the question there is,
Yeah.
who benefits? You see, by the time Safaricom is hiring the house help for you, you're sure of the standard is going to be very high,
Mhm.
the quality of the person, the pay, the work
Mhm.
conditions. But because we have put a law in that today, if Mr. Soros' employer was to give him a house help, he would be taxed on top of his salary. I would say you're also receiving some 30,000 a year in the name of a house help. So I think it's also counterproductive in the
Yeah.
sense that we are blocking a sector of the economy that is such a low-lying fruit that we could encourage to grow.
I hope someone important is listening and they've listened to that. This question will usher us into the financial question I was going to ask. What can an employee do when you get a verbal contract? You agree on a salary and so you start working. Then 2 weeks later, you get a written contract, but the salary is different. And even the working hours, what do you do?
I think it's important that you know, for you to take up an employment contract, you need to sign in agreement with the contract that is being given to you. So it's not a letter that's given to you and with instructions. So at that point, I think the employee should be able to say that this is not what we agreed verbally. Therefore, I would not be able to sign this off until you correct it to what we had agreed, because that is what should be right. So I think that's one of the things that needs to happen. Ensure that you do not sign off the contract until it is amended. Because the moment you put pen to paper on that contract, you have agreed to those terms that are there.
Okay.
So I think that's the first port of call, to have that discussion with the person who you had the discussion with and let them know that this is not what we had agreed. And I think sometimes we also, I think Vincent alluded to it, that employers are very powerful. So employees feel, you know, you're the lesser person in the equation. So, but if you think about it, you also have equal rights. You have the right to be able to refuse and get the contract amended to what should have been.
Okay.
But it's not strange. Of course, that does happen where there's people who are not acting professionally.
Yeah.
But I think that's the first thing that I would ask anyone to do.
Somebody's asking, on that issue of house helps, what's the minimum wage they should get?
I think I can give them a very quick one. Normally, dependent on where you are, if you're within Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, it's 13,572.
Wow.
And if you're not paying NSSIF, which remember there's a contribution from the employee and also on your side as well.
Yeah.
Remember, or the day you dismiss this person, or the day you declare them redundant, if that ever happens, there's a severance pay that you are exposing yourself to. So if you're living in all other towns like Mavoko, Roiro, Limuru, former municipalities, it's 12,522. And any other area, it is 7,240.
Wow.
So basically, if you're in Nairobi, Kisumu, Mombasa, talk of about 14,000. The good thing, luckily, this time around, it's inclusive of house allowance. Formerly, it used to be exclusive of house allowance. So on top of 13,000, you had to add 15% for house allowance. Although, of course, you can argue that the house help is living in your house, but which I think it's an issue also as Kenyans. We need to think about it critically, because it also means if your house help is living in your house, then it means house help is supposed to be an age. It has to happen with a very limited amount of age.
Yeah.
Because that scenario limits the socialization of this individual. Because how long can somebody live in your house without having a life and still have a life?
Very
so
true.
These are questions we need to ask ourselves. And I think also, as you pointed out, and maybe it's important to bring out, for me as a Christian, I want to bring out Ephesians chapter 4. And I think also the book of 2 Timothy, which is guiding both employers and employees.
Yes.
And on the question you had asked earlier about a contract coming up, an employer behaving fraudulently, it's important for employees to know that when you're being employed, it is not just the employer choosing an employee. It's even you as an employee choosing an employer. So the same way I say that employers should have high standards, employees should equally have very high standards. You should know when to go.
I think sometimes because jobs are sometimes scarce to find, people get into a space
Yes.
where they feel so desperate, and so whatever is available is whatever they take. I'm foreseeing today a very interesting conversation in some of our homes today, where the house help will say, Mama, najua leo nilikuwa nasikia redio na nikasikia wakisema hivi. But on the issues of money.
Yes, James, just a quick one. In terms of the regulation of wages, which Vincent alluded to, I think it's good to also point out that it's not just the house helps that are in that order.
Yeah.
So there's quite a number of categories of employees who are put there, and employers need to abide by that in terms of the minimum payment that is required to those employees. So there's not been an increase that has happened in, I think, the past 3 years, because what used to happen is the labor minister would then gazette the increment that is going to happen. But in the last 3 years, we've not had 3 or so years, we've not had that increment.
Wow. Okay. On the issue of remuneration, what does the law say? You know, I think we had an interesting scenario when COVID hit, and I saw some companies telling their employees they are going to get a salary cut, wakakimbia kotini. So what are some main things we need to know about remuneration where the law is concerned?
I think that I want to begin by saying that, first of all, remember, employment is a contract.
Yeah.
And it's more than a contract. Some people say that employment is more of a status. You know, for rogue people, when people are rogue, employment is a contract. So it's a game where the employee is trying to get more from the employer than he's giving in employment, and the employer is trying to get more from the employee than he's willing to pay for. Those are bandits. But now, when we come to civilized people, employment is a status, where on one hand, for you are whatever you do as your job defines you. That is where we should be heading towards. And if we were to apply the biblical principle of people who are working as if they're working for God.
Yeah.
You know, one time I was in an environment where there were pagans or other atheists, and I told them, can you imagine if you had an employee who is working for you as if he's working for God? I'm like, my goodness, look at that. Look at that standard. So with that in mind, there are other business realities that start coming into place. When employees, on one hand, when COVID hit, the question becomes, as employers, how genuine have you been in terms of involving your employers in the welfare and affairs of the business? Because the truth is, not all businesses suffered during COVID.
Yeah.
So yes, according to the law, once a salary has been put, the employer is obliged to pay. But here's the problem. If we move on, if we stretch that line of thinking, then it means when I have no business and you guys are insisting on being paid, then let us dissolve this company. Let's go for insolvency. Yeah, let's declare ourselves bankrupt so that whatever small shillings are there which are left to be, which are available, you go for it.
Yeah.
Or the alternative can be, why don't we consider the survival of this business? Because the idea is the employee needs the job as much as the employer needs the business. A very important concept. The employee needs the job and the employer needs the business.
Yeah.
And so when you look at this thing as more as a partnership and not an extortion, where the employer is trying to extort you and you are trying to extort the employer, it means that is where courts were saying, before we look at what is legal, before we go the legal way, why don't we look for what is practical and beneficial for both
of you? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. There's a question here, Wycliffe, maybe you can take this one. Somebody's asking, what do I do in a situation where I'm always being given extra work that's outside of what's in the contract? You know, sometimes there's that thing in the contract that says, and any other whatever responsibility that management may see fit. And so what happens when I'm always being told to do this extra, and it's outside of what we agreed on, and they keep pointing me back to that, but it says here, how do you handle a situation like that?
Okay, so in terms of the employment contract, I had alluded to the fact that there's a number of things that need to be in the employment contract, part of employment, and the right thing to do in the job description is to please avoid any other tasks that may be assigned. You stop what the employee needs to do. So that's something that I always advise, that job descriptions need to be very clear on what are the things that someone needs to do.
Okay.
So in this instance, for this gentleman who says that he's constantly given roles that are not in the job description, one, in the first place, is there even a job description? Is it signed by the employee and the employer? Because if you don't have a job description, then that's where the problem starts. But once there's a job description, you can then have the conversation with your manager. You can have the conversation with your HR manager to be able to say that, look here, this is what my employment says, but this is what I am doing. Can this be amended so that it's formal? If it's something that is requiring more of your time, can you push for even a salary increment, for example, to say, now what you're paying me is not equivalent to what the work and the output that I'm doing. So a lot of this is about conversations. I know in Kenya we fear to have conversations with the employer, but remember the employer is not, it's not just about it. There's representation of the employer in people, in your senior management, in your HR. So it's human beings as yourself. So you should have that conversation. And I always say, it's a relationship that if you're in an abusive relationship, you have recourse for that. So you either walk out of the relationship or continue to stay in the relationship and work on it. So I think it's a tricky situation, but I think always the first thing that I say is confront that. But from the technical side of it, ensure that all employees who have job descriptions, ensure that you've signed your job description that shows the things that you need to do, and then do not have anything that gives that room for any other business on that.
Okay, I'm just wondering, Vincent, with issues like inflation affecting us, does the law say anything about salary increment?
I don't think so. I've not come across any such provision. Remember, the whole idea of a contract is predictability.
Yes.
So that if you are to start tying contracts to inflation, I think the only people who have the luxury of having contracts which are fluctuating are banks, because they're very powerful. They can fluctuate your loan interest depending on what is happening. Under normal circumstances, other people have to stick, apart from banks, the matatus.
Yeah.
Anytime there is rain or there is traffic jam, they increase fare.
Yeah.
The rest of us, we have to basically make do with whatever you agreed on, because the idea is when the employer is losing, your wages are guaranteed.
Yeah.
But you see, and it's just the whole idea, because once in a while it may end up that the employer is about to lose. And that's why I think when we look at it, it means we have to go beyond the law.
Yeah.
We have to start going beyond the law. If we are operating at the level of what the law says, it means both as employers and as employees, we are way below standard. We have to rise above to what people call, if you are an employer, can you become an industrial citizen? Somebody who is looking at your job beyond just what it's on paper. And if you're an employer, and more so somebody who would be tempted to have a Christian thinking, you are a redemptive entrepreneur. Somebody who is looking at work from the lens of God and from somebody who is being watched.
Very true.
Also, again, the question you just asked, it's important to note and very tricky that the thing you are selling your employer is your time. It's your time. And that's where the tricky bit becomes. So when you say, I am doing something extra, the question becomes, is it meaning you are taking more time? Because then the other question can be then, if I am an employer and I notice I have given you job work that is not occupying you fully, you are forever on Facebook.
Yes.
Should I also renegotiate the contract that I pay you less? Of course, the law can allow that.
James, I think it's important also you did ask the question on whether salaries can increase.
We are losing you, my friend.
And all that.
Go back a bit.
The collective bargaining agreements.
Go back a bit. We had lost you. Start again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So what I was talking about is the issue around collective agreements. So these are negotiated by the employer and the employees representative, which are usually the trade unions. So in that, you can have clauses that call for increase at specific periods. They're usually negotiated for 2 to 3 years generally. And so in that, there will be increments that happen at specific periods. So that is an aspect that can guide on that. And
okay.
Typically, when you're negotiating, you look at issues around cost of living, inflation, and different terms that would guide those increments.
Okay. I have a lot of questions coming in. We may not be able to go through all of them because I have got time for one more question. We may need to do a part 2 of this discussion. Let me ask this one for you, Vincent. Somebody says, I was to resume work in February. My employer gave me an unpaid leave over the phone. 4 months down the line, she hasn't said anything. What are my legal options?
I think, first of all, you're saying your employer gave you an unpaid leave. I think
Yes.
for unpaid leave to happen, there have to be consensus. And that consensus has to be evidenced in the sense that was it written? Because that's what you call a material fact and a material change in the particulars, which is very regulated by the Section 10 of the Employment Act. It means at that particular point of time, there were supposed to be various prescriptions put in place.
Yeah.
So I think in that particular case, this person is suspecting that they have been dismissed. Chinyamaji, you know, Chinyamaji, they have been dismissed. And to that particular extent, I think the first thing to do for most of the employees, I would say, the fastest way to get your things done, please find out your nearest labor office. Find out. I don't even need to go into the nitty-gritty of telling you what your right is, because of course you are entitled. You are supposed to be given payment in lieu of notice or given notice in advance of in that particular circumstance. But given the amount of issues that are legal that may go in, the fastest way for any employee is, please find out where the nearest labor office is. If you're in Nairobi, you can start from it's called Nya House. Yes, in Nya House, I think around 6th floor. You can make your way there, go, explain yourself. Those labor officers are normally very prompt and quick in terms of helping you know what your rights are at a particular point in time. And the good thing, when they call your employer must show up. And the lovely thing is, before the labor officer, no lawyer is allowed. So the employer must come in person. And that means you can banter in a more genuine scenario. Of course, for those who can be able to afford it, that's when you can begin thinking about going on to a lawyer. Because remember, before I quickly recommend a lawyer, the lawyer will also require that you employ them for them to work for you. So you need to ask yourself, are you an employee or an employer?
Gentlemen, I'm out of time, but I will call on you for part 2 because there's so many questions coming in. It's been great having both of you. Thank you so much for making yourselves available. I'm out of time. We'll connect again next week on another Financial Clinic. Have a great day.
For this and more of our shows, log on to www.familymediaonline.com to enjoy a wide variety of programs from current affairs to testimonials and features, pastoral and inspirational shows, kids entertainment, and so much more. Also stream live on www.familymedia.tv.